Hi, I'm Dr. Teeple, and welcome to another video. Today we're talking about plant and cell growth, but from a higher dimensional viewpoint, especially from 6 dimensions. It's kind of interesting how that turns out to be a specific dimension in nature of how it works out. So we'll just kind of start with how it works in 1 dimensions. So how a plant would grow, it starts with a stem, and then it reaches a certain branching point, and it'll branch out, and then you'll have 2 branches, and then it might decide to grow a leaf or another stem, and then that stem, it'll branch out again, and then usually the branches get smaller and thinner, and then it creates kind of this a fractal-like pattern, although it's not exactly a fractal. It's kind of like random, depending on or slightly askew, but it still is like a pattern of a fractal-like nature, and in nature in many different forms. But you can model them algebraically with the so-called L systems after Meyer, I believe. So you can look that up if you wish. Something that looks sort of like this drawing here can be generated with this two-ruled L system. So F just means move forward, which means grow 1 stem. And X is just the actual plant itself at that time, and then you replace it. So in this case, you'd grow. Minus means bend in a certain direction, and plus would mean go in the counterclockwise direction. So in the opposite direction. The bracket means well, I won't define the whole library for you, but I'll refer you to a link there. But essentially, you can grow them with a simple algorithm. And if you keep going, you do generate a fractal if it goes on forever, and this is very natural. But I want to show you a different way about how these can be generated from higher dimensions. What's interesting is quasi-crystals, which were found in nature, actually, and they're very interesting, is that they have this aperiodicity, which is they don't have a regular repeating pattern, but if you look far enough along the pattern, you will eventually see it repeat, no matter what pattern you're looking for. And an example is that they all arise from a very simple regular structure. So if you have like a 1-dimensional pattern that it isn't, it's not periodic, but is aperiodic. You can get it just from, say, a 2-dimensional lattice, and you just draw a line through it that has an irrational slope, and then if you draw a projection of all the lattice points onto that line, you will find that there are it's a tiling on that line with and it's always going to just be of two different size tiles. I know it might not look like that here because this lattice wasn't exactly square, but even then and it's not exactly even, but you're going to have two tiles of size A and B, and then if you look at it, you're going to have, say, well, this is A, B, 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 A, B, A, B, and it goes on and on. And it doesn't look like it has a pattern, but in fact, if you keep going on, you will see that you can find any pattern you want repeated eventually, no matter how long the sequence you want to be repeated. What's interesting is that if this slope were the golden ratio, you'll find that the pattern relates to the Fibonacci numbers, but there's a good paper I can show you to reference to that. The thing is that if this lattice were 6 dimensions, then you actually get these actual crystals that have appeared in nature, either the aluminum manganese crystals and many other crystals, and you can actually get all the aperiodic tilings of multiple different space-filling three-dimensional tilings that make up these aperiodic crystals that have been found in nature or are yet to be discovered. What's even interesting, though, is if we were, instead of to make crystals in 3 dimensions, what if we were to just project a simple little line that weaves through a simple hypercubic lattice in 6 dimensions and project that? Well, the idea is it might not be connected when you project it into R3. Well, if you take a 6-dimensional hypersurface of an irrational, say if one of its coplanes had an irrational slope relative to this 6-dimensional lattice, say the golden mean, then this could be a projection matrix from R6 into R3. Then you'd get a spectrum of all these trees. Some would be very boring, like a straight line, or just simple little things like this. But it's also possible to get fractal trees and all these other trees, and so one simple little zigzag in R6 could generate all trees. That is something to investigate. That hasn't been published yet, but that's quite interesting. So we've discussed 1D and trees. If we go to 2-dimensional growth of plants, such as flowers, you know the Fibonacci sequence in elementary school. You were taught that, or especially in junior high, that if you count the number of petals of a flower as you go out, they do follow a Fibonacci sequence. Or the same thing with pine cones, and sometimes with pineapples. And these groups of petals are called pastiches, and sometimes they don't always fit. So there's always what's called a disclination in them where it's and I'll talk to just after this quickly about what that means when these cells just don't quite fit right, or these petals. So it's the same thing about a cell or a flower, but a group of cells. But these disclinations, and a disclination is just simply like if you were to walk around the disclination, the number of petals or the number of cells around it is just a different number than any other petal or cell. And they follow an aperiodic pattern. If you were to walk around a loop and count them, say like, oh well, here they're 4 petals apart, but now here they're 2 apart, and here they're 2 apart, here they're 4 apart, here they're 2 apart. So it's just like here, this exact same aperiodic pattern in one dimension, but it's for every loop. And then you do see these Fibonacci layers. Sometimes they follow a Lucas sequence, like these 6% of Norwegian pine cones for some reason. But nature and natural selection has forced them to follow these quasi-crystal patterns of the disclinations, and also the Fibonacci sequence of the actual arrangements. And this also has to do with the golden mean for the slope of the plane that you project on. So that has to do with natural selection, but also the dimension of the space that we live in. So 6 dimensions has to do with natural selection as well as the golden ratio. So that's very interesting. Talking about disclinations, that leads us to what's very interesting, that I also coined the term dimensional catastrophe. So this is about cell growth, or cell division. So as a plant grows, if you look, say, like at a leaf, it's kind of smooth around its border. So cell growth, as you know, is exponential. So it's going to be it's going to be e to the I should actually say it's going to be not e to the r, but e to the volume of the cell, in this case, or the plant. So it'll be e to the r squared, and because each cell will divide, it would be e to the r if you just say that, well, the cells mostly divide at the border. But what happens is, if the leaf gets bigger, so r gets bigger, then what happens at the border is that there's no room, because the number of cells at the border is only r squared, or r. It's proportional to the perimeter. So those cells have to get kicked out of the one-dimensional boundary and get boosted into 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions. And so this buckling occurs, and then as you see, these spikes happen, and it actually forms shapes that look like the Dirichlet function. And the distribution of where the ripples occur follow the Dedekind eta function distribution. So that's very interesting. So number theory comes into play here. And then if we jump to 3 dimensions, again, if you have a cancer tumor that grows, when it's small, it naturally is quite round, but then when it gets bigger, these cells then have to be kicked out of the 2-dimensional boundary and into a space-filling fractal-like curve, and so it's, like the piano curve or something like that, and so that occurs when the size of the cell when the size of the cell has exceeded the exponential growth of the the tissue has exceeded the exponential growth rate. So the size has exceeded the exponential growth rate of the tissue. So that's very interesting. There's other ways. One final example, just to finish off, is that there's other ways that that plants can embed themselves into higher dimensions, and that's the example of the lily flower, and it grows on a Dini surface. So if you've seen the lily, it actually embeds. So it can be embedded in 2 dimensions if it were in hyperbolic space or something like the projective plane. And it actually grows on the Dini surface, which looks something like this. So that's the next time you see a lily, you can take a look. So thank you very much for your time, and yeah, there's a lot of references to check out. So thank you for watching. Thanks. I know that was